Well, news out of the NFL when it comes to Colts rookie quarterback Anthony Richardson heading for the IR with that AC sprain joint in his throwing shoulder on that right side. This means he'll miss the next 4 games for the Colts. Richardson injured that shoulder, of course, against the Titans on Sunday. That means backup quarterback Gardner Minshew will be QB1 heading into next week against the Jags on CBS. Taking a look at those next 4 games for the Colts on their schedule. I mentioned that one against the Jags on the road there against the Browns week 7. The Saints and Panthers, they are 3-2, so we'll see. Gardner has played well, but of course when it comes to Richardson, a lot of people have him on his fantasy team, so we'll see how that pans out. And nobody better to talk about it. Our fantasy brain trust in the building, in the flesh, both of them, Dave Richard and Heath Cummings. And of course we have to start with AR1, QB1. Heading to the shelf, thoughts on that? And then, of course, Gardner Minshew may be elevated here.
So Minshew's going to get the opportunity, and I think he's a good bye-week replacement quarterback and maybe a streaming type of signal caller that fantasy managers can use while there's no Anthony Richardson. And the thing that I like about his matchup this week, Brandon, 22 or more fantasy points to 4 or 5 quarterbacks allowed by the Jacksonville Jaguars. This defense it's playing a little bit over their head. I don't think they're as good as they've been this year, and I think Minshew, the former Jaguar, can take advantage. I think he's in that streaming conversation. Not a bad guy to go with, but I wouldn't want to use him in the 2 games after against Cleveland and New Orleans. Both of them are at home for Indianapolis, but man, those are some tough defenses.
Yeah, I mean, with the way it sounds now, we might not be thinking about the next 3 or 4 weeks with Minshew. We might be thinking about the next 6 to 8 weeks with Gardner Minshew. And so as disappointed as I am for Anthony Richardson, because he really did show us some things in his limited action, it's an exciting time to see Gardner Minshew going into Jacksonville to start against his old team. Should be a fun day.
And what I'm worried about is, will these injuries change Anthony Richardson? First he had the concussion, now he's got a shoulder sprain. Is he going to run less and throw more moving forward? Half the appeal for him in fantasy, Brandon, was his rushing ability. He was so good at it. They can't let the leopard change his spots. He's got to be able to keep running the football. Hopefully he figures out a way to avoid those injuries moving forward.
All right, for Gardner Minshew, a lot of people already have him on their roster because of the injuries you're talking about with Richards. If we're looking at some of the trends, other QBs, if he's not available, what are we thinking, Dave?
I think Matthew Stafford is the one you pivot toward. He had his first game with over 20 fantasy points last week with Cooper Kupp back. It was barely over 20 fantasy points, but he's throwing a ton, and I think the numbers will follow. Arizona is who he plays this week. They've allowed at least 23 fantasy points to 3 of the past 4 quarterbacks they face. That includes Daniel Jones and a half going off against this Cardinals defense. I think Stafford is a top 12 quarterback this week.
I like Baker Mayfield as a borderline top 12 quarterback, and I did not expect to say that in the year 2023, but he has at least 19 fantasy points in 3 of his 4 games this season. The team he's playing, the Lions, have been so good against the run, but they've allowed 4 or 5 quarterbacks to score at least 19 fantasy points against them. The only one who didn't was Desmond Ridder. I think Mayfield can get to that 19 to 20 point range. This will be a game where they have to throw more than expected because they can't run very efficiently and nobody runs against the Lions.
So Baker has been feeling dangerous lately with the Bucs there this season. Something else I thought I wouldn't say as well. What about a receiver, though, Heath, that might benefit from Minshew being QB1?
It's Josh Downs. He has actually a 24% target share on throws from Gardner Minshew. Those throws just a little bit more accurate coming from Minshew at this stage in his career than Anthony Richardson. I think you could see 7 to 8 targets. I actually prioritized Downs over KJ Osborne in a couple of leagues. I do like what he could be with Minshew and rest of season, a number 3 wide receiver.
He's been a good slot target and a good PPR wide receiver. I don't know if I like him better than Osborne in non-PPR, though, because Osborne has been that touchdown target for Kirk Cousins when they've played together. 20 games with at least 5 targets for KJ Osborne. He's had 13 with at least 12 PPR points, and in 11 of those 13 games, a touchdown was involved to help him get those numbers up. He's not the burner that you might think that he was or that he was in college. He's slowed down a little bit, but he's got some physicality to him, and he's got that nose for the end zone, and the Vikings certainly need guys like that with Justin Jefferson not there. I'm okay with Osborne as a flex this week.
All right, yeah, I might need to pick him up because Justin Jefferson was my
hurry. He's going
pick.
fast.
He was my pick, and now he's on the show.
Yeah, but he's not going to do what Justin Jefferson did.
Oh,
That's
no.
the problem. This is a Band-Aid on the spot where you add Justin Jefferson, and you're going to try and upgrade on that Band-Aid. But for now, that's where you start, is with KJ Osborne.
All right, so those are the receivers. What are we thinking about the backfield for you, Dave?
I'm going to go to Chicago. And Deontay Foreman got picked up in a bunch of leagues, and he's got the opportunity to be the lead back for Chicago if Khalil Herbert is indeed out, and that's looking likely, and if rookie Roschon Johnson ends up not playing. Remember, he suffered a concussion last Thursday. He could clear protocol, and if that comes to pass, then you could see Roschon as the lead back and Deontay Foreman as the backup behind him. What I like about Foreman, 13 games since the start of 2021 where he's had at least 12 carries. He's come through with 11 fantasy points. Doesn't matter if it's PPR or non-PPR, 11 fantasy points in 9 of them. So there's some consistency to him when he gets the work. It's a matter of whether or not Foreman will get the work. I think he could end up being a good flex in non-PPR leagues, maybe someone that I'd avoid in full PPR leagues. If there is no Roschon Johnson, though, that outlook does get a lot brighter.
And I'll go to Amari DeMarcado, filling in for James Conner, who is now on IR as well. Now, this could get a little bit messy if Keontae Ingram is able to come back from injury, but I would expect DeMarcado to be the pass-catching guy, if nothing else. 7 targets in his last 2 games, had 10 carries last week in place of Conner, turned those into 45 yards and a touchdown. This Cardinals offense, and in particular their run game, has been better than we expected it to be and more efficient than we expected it to be coming into this season. DeMarcado is a low-end number 2 running back if there's no Ingram. If Ingram's back, it's better to view him as more of a flex.
Those are 2 names we've been hearing the past couple of weeks from you guys. When it comes to tight ends, Heath, I have no idea where to go because it seems like that's the most shakiest position when it comes to that roster spot. What are you thinking?
It's certainly the shakiest position, and what's happened, unfortunately, is a guy has a good game, we go chasing him, and then he turns back into what he was.
Hunter Henry.
Hopefully that won't happen with Logan Thomas, who just had 9 catches for 77 yards on 11 targets. He has been a huge part of this offense when he's been healthy. We've seen Eric Bieniemy kind of take that tight end tendency from the Chiefs. He brought it to Washington. Not sure that's the best plan when you have Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin, but it works pretty well for Logan Thomas. He's shown a floor this season of 7 PPR fantasy points. That's not bad for a tight end, and he's shown you 20-point upside. I'm starting him as a top 10 guy this week.
Yeah, I like that you noticed that about Bieniemy, and tight ends in general for Washington have gotten a lot of work, so I think Logan Thomas is a really good call. And I like Thomas better than Dalton Schultz in Houston. We know that there's no Tank Dell. He's sidelined with the concussion. That should open up some opportunities for Dalton Schultz. He's had at least 13 PPR points in back-to-back games. I don't love his matchup this week, though. He's taken on the Saints exactly 10 PPR points to 2 of the past 3 tight ends they've faced. It's been Luke Musgrave, who had 6 catches, Cade Otton, who scored on them, and the Saints just shut out Hunter Henry last week, speaking of tight ends that we chased over the beginning of the season. I'm just okay with Schultz as a streaming tight end, and Houston has a bye next week. So if you don't really love him, you shouldn't roster him, or if you already picked him up and you don't have a better tight end option, or you can't sink your teeth into somebody else that maybe can give you multiple weeks, like Logan Thomas, you can move on from Dalton Schultz.
By the way, I did pick up Logan, so I have been listening to you both because I had Pat Freiermuth. He's on the shelf, and then Hunter Henry.
Now he's on a bye. He can't even use him this week.
But Hunter gave me a big O, so that's why Logan Thomas is with me now. Look, if you missed anything, of course, between Dave and Heath, you can catch him, as always, Fantasy Football Today. The guy's giving you everything you need. Week 6 is a couple days away. Just download and subscribe.